Hey y'all, welcome to our second day talking about matrices. We've got our homework here. Again, no presentation, but graphing calculator is required. If you don't have yours right now, go get it or open whichever app you're going to be using. I recommend that if you're not sure, make sure that it has matrix options. So a quick Google search, graphing calculator matrix should hopefully give you some idea, whichever one you might be using. If you're using an app, make sure that that has the ability to do these. You can do these problems by hand, but they are incredibly laborious, and I strongly recommend that you go get your graphing calculator. So, let's get started. Make sure your notes are all set up, everything like that. So, just like we have with numbers, we have inverses and identities with matrices, right? So the identity is, for usual numbers, is 1, because anything multiplied by 1 is itself. With matrices, the identity is another matrix where just this diagonal number is 1, and then all the rest of them are zeros. And an inverse matrix, whereas before would be something like the inverse of 5 is 1/5. The inverse matrix here, we write it like this, and it's where when you multiply them together, they're equal to one of the identity matrices. So one thing that's really helpful is to be able to find inverse matrices. Now you can do this through a law of manipulation to say, okay, well this times, what times this would give us this matrix, and you can do some back solving. It's going to be an incredibly lengthy process using a large system of equations. It's much easier to just use your calculator. So let's talk about how to do that. I'm going to give instructions here for the TI series. If you're using something else, please be sure to contact me and I can help you work through it. I recommend doing it on Zoom so we can do it in real time. If that time doesn't work for you, please reach out and we can figure this out, but you're going to want, as I said, to do this on your calculator. So if I'm using the 84 or 83 or 89, any of those models, the first thing I'm going to want to make sure that you can find is the matrix button. Now the matrix button is a secondary function. For most of you it's going to be on the inverse. Ooh, look, we're going to be using this guy later. But for most of you, you're going to want to go to there, and when you pick that, you're going to have 3 options in your heading. Now, we'll be using all of these options, but we're going to start every problem with going to the edit function here, and that's going to let us type in our matrices. So if I want to type in this matrix right here, I'm going to go to edit, and you can put in as many as you like. I'm just going to start by picking A, and that's where I'm going to put in my first matrix. So click enter there. So the first thing you want to do is from there you've got your A, and it'll ask you what the dimensions are. Now remember, these are the rows first and then the columns. So in this case I have 1 row, 2 row, and then I also have the same number of columns. So I want to make it a 2 by 2. Click enter, and then it will give you a matrix that you can fill in with numbers where you've got, in this case, 2 rows and 2 columns, and we're going to fill in our numbers just by clicking, filling in the numbers and then clicking enter. So in this case, I want to plug in 2, 4, -1, and 3. You can put in decimals, you can put in terms of pi, you can put in any type of number that you like. And that's going to give us our matrix. So now if we go back to the same matrix button, you'll notice that if you're in the name category, that your A matrix, or whichever one you used, is now filled in, and it'll tell you the dimensions, just so that you can keep track of them a little bit. So you're like, excellent, I got my 2 by 2 A matrix there. So what you want to do is, to find the inverse of it, you want to select that matrix and click enter, and it should take you back to your original screen. If it doesn't, just clear out, go back to your, try again. And it should automatically fill in on that main screen a middle matrix, right? Now, if I want to find the inverse, I'm going to use this button, just like the notation shows. And so then it will click that button, give me the little inverse sign, and when I click enter, it'll automatically give me a matrix with everything all filled in, 0.3 in this case, 0.4, negative 0.4, 0.1, and 0.2. This right here is your answer. This is the inverse matrix for this little one we started with. Let's talk about how we're going to use this inverse matrices besides just making it and practicing our calculator skills. All right, you might recognize this problem from yesterday as a system of equations problem, and we absolutely had the ability to solve that there. But what this is going to teach us is how to use inverses and our calculators to solve this and more complex versions of this problem very quickly. So, first thing I want you to do is just recall that if I was solving a regular equation where I have a number times a variable, which is basically what I have here, number times a variable, yes, they're in matrices, but they're equal to another number here, 10. Now, it's absolutely fine for me to write, instead of dividing by 5, I can say times 5 inverse. It's a weird way to write it, but it's not wrong. And the 5 times the 5 inverse cancel out, and I'm left with my variable by itself is equal to 5 inverse times 10, which in this case is 2. So, while a weird way to solve it, absolutely works, and we're going to do the same thing with our matrices. You'll notice here that this is matrix A that we just had, and then our variables, and is equal to this matrix here, which we are going to enter in as B. So as a quick reminder, you want to go to the matrix button, edit, and then B is going to be a 2 by 1 matrix. Then what you'll do is go back to your blank screen, go to your matrix buttons again, and you should see that now you have an A that is the 2 by 2 matrix that we made, and B, which is the 2 by 1 matrix that you just made, and you're going to enter in, we're going to do the same thing that we did here, multiplying by the inverse of the number on this side, so A inverse, which we just found, but you can just type it in again, then times matrix B using the name function, and then when you click enter there, you end up with negative 1, 2, like this. Now, what that means is that we cancel out the A on this side, and we have X, Y is equal to the matrix negative 1, 2, and if you remember from the last lesson, that means that the solution is negative 1, 2, just like when we did this by hand. So, this isn't necessarily a faster or easier way to do small, simple systems like this. However, we can now use our graphing calculator in the same method to solve systems like this, which is a much more complex problem. So we're going to write it as matrices. Now, if you'll remember from early on, when we were doing this earlier, these were the coefficients for our x and y terms, and these were the answers. The same thing's going to happen here. We're going to make a matrix of the coefficients, a matrix of the variables, and a matrix of the answers. I tend to fill in the variables and the answers first. The variables are x, y, z, and w. They've put them in this order. The answers are 0, 1, 2, and 3. Answers here, variables w, z, y, x. And then the coefficients, we're just going to go straight across one equation at a time. For the first equation, the x coefficient is 1, the y is 2, the z, you'll notice that there isn't a z term here, so that means its coefficient is 0, and w is 3, because we're going to go in this same order. Second equation, the coefficient of x is 0, coefficient of y is 1, z is 1, w is 1. Third equation, there's no x term, so that's 0, y is 1, z is 0, and w is 1. Lastly, 1, 2, 0, and 2. So once we've got these all filled in, put them into your calculator. This I'm going to then call C, which is a 4 by 4 matrix, and I'm going to call this one D in the edit function, which is a 4 by 1 matrix. Once you've done that, pause the video while you do that, and then you're going to, from there, use the name function, and you're going to type in this case, C inverse times D, just like we did with A and B for the first example, and you're going to get the new matrix on your calculator, -1, 5, -1, 3, and these are your variables in the order that they've written here. The first one is x, then y, then z, then w. So while this method isn't a great method for small, simple ones like we've been doing, it's very helpful as the number of variables and the number of equations increases. So hopefully this calculator work went pretty straightforward. Again, if you're stuck on any calculator questions, Zoom meeting is probably the best time to do that, which again is every day that we have class at 1 to 1:45. Let me know what questions I can help you with.